And to begin with, I'll just briefly outline the agenda for tonight. First of all, we'll have the lecture, and then after the lecture, there'll be a meeting for initiates and members of Mu Sigma Rho. We'll have that here in the front, and then also after the meeting, there'll be a reception in the back of the room, and coffee and tea and cookies are over there. And that'll meet in the back of the room and kind of spill out into the hall. So the reception and the Mu Sigma Rho business meeting will be going on at the same time. Okay, now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Roy Hickman. Dr. Hickman is the leader of the sample survey section of the statistical laboratory at Iowa State. And he's also a good friend and business associate of our speaker. And I've asked him to introduce our speaker to you. Dr. Hickman?
Thanks, Dale.
It's a real pleasure for me to be able to introduce the Mu Sigma Rho speaker for 1980, Mr. Edward Schillmuller. I first met Ed in conjunction with our activities in the American Statistical Association. Ed has always been very active in the survey research methods section of the ASA. He served on several committees within that section, and he's very much in evidence at the annual meetings. And he's also a very active member of the American Association of Public Opinion Research and the American Marketing Association. Ed grew up and graduated from high school in Chicago. He then made a very wise decision and migrated west to Iowa, where he attended Iowa State University, majoring in mathematics. He was a member of the ISU varsity football team. Seems that his mental activities kept pace with the physical, since he was a member of the Mathematics Honorary Society and was president of that society during his senior year. He received his BS degree in mathematics from ISU in 1953 and an MBA degree in statistics and marketing from the University of Chicago in 1958. Now, it didn't actually take him from 1953 to 58 to finish a master's degree. He did do a short stint of service in the U.S. Armed Forces, where he served in the Air Force in Morocco and Spain. He was a consumer research analyst with Standard Oil of Indiana from 1958 to 1963. He joined A.C. Nielsen Company in 1963 as Special Projects Coordinator and was named Manager of Statistical Research in 1968. He's presently Vice President of Statistical Research for the Media Research Group of the A.C. Nielsen Company, and he's on the Board of Directors of that group. He's responsible for the design, selection, and maintenance of national samples and for the statistical methodology used within the Media Resources Group. I think I should mention that he's maintained his ties with Iowa since he had a son to graduate in statistics from Iowa State University in 1978. He presently has two daughters at Iowa State, one majoring in mathematics and the other in landscape architecture. His topic for tonight's talk will be the Nielsen TV ratings, what, why, and how. Mr. Schillmuller.
If we can, maybe we can dim the light in the back. I've been asked, I guess, to use the mic. Well, it's always a pleasure to come back to Iowa State, being a graduate of ISU. I don't get back as much as I'd like to, and so I welcome the opportunity to come back at this time. My job involves a certain amount of traveling, and a couple of weeks ago I happened to be in the Washington airport and had a little time to kill and went into the newsstand to buy a paper and did a little browsing among the books and came across this book, which you probably can't read the title, but it's Nielsen's Children, the sizzling new novel about television. And apparently this, I haven't read it yet, and apparently it's about the first woman network newscaster. And it says, "You're the woman who lives what every woman dreams. You're Kate Sinclair, the first woman to break into network TV news. You're barely 30 and you have $1 million contract. Kings and movie stars call you on the phone and you can go anywhere in the world as long as your Nielsen ratings keep going up." It all sounds very mysterious and intriguing, and I hope I can take a bit of the mystery out of the Nielsen ratings for you tonight. As Roy mentioned, my topic will be the Nielsen ratings, what, why, and how. In 1980, advertisers, I need a little light, okay. In 1980, advertisers will spend almost $10 billion on television broadcasting to reach and sell to 76 million households. For this reason, information about program audience size and composition is needed by advertisers, by broadcasters, and by program producers. Such information will help advertisers predict what they can expect and what they got for their money. Audience information is used by networks and television stations for program decisions, where commercials are placed on programs, prices for broadcasting commercials, selling of time, and for promotion of programs. Program producers and talent are interested in audience levels and trends because they help determine the fate of programs and also help guide the direction for future program development. Their television broadcasting, as I indicated, is an expensive proposition. A commercial, a 30-second commercial on primetime television will go anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000. So I think you can see that estimates of audience size are needed by advertisers. And these estimates of audience size are generally referred to as ratings. So what is a rating? A rating is simply the percent of television households or persons within a survey area that are tuned or viewing a specific program or station. The Nielsen ratings that you probably read about in the paper are the ones that are produced for national network programs. But we also produce them for local stations such as here in Des Moines and Ames. An estimate of the number of households tuned or the number of persons viewing can be obtained by applying the rating to an estimate of the number of households or persons in the survey area, for example, the US. Ratings are estimates, and I repeat, these are estimates, of the activity of all television households or persons in a survey area. They are subject to varying degrees of error, some associated with the chance variation inherent with the use of sampling, and others related to the methods used to collect and process tuning and viewing data. Ratings are sometimes viewed with an accuracy that is unwarranted. In fact, they are sometimes viewed as if they were an accounting report, that if a program got an 18 rating, it's 18 and not 17.9 or 18.1. Ratings are also estimates of the size of the audience. They are quantitative measures, not qualitative measures. The term rating is a misnomer, since it implies a measure of the quality of a program. Ratings reflect likes and dislikes for programs as they are presented at a given time in a specific program environment. A high-rated program is not necessarily the best program. It is merely the program that had the largest estimated audience because of its appeal, its promotion, the time it was telecast, and the programming competition at the time it was telecast. Ratings are a measure of performance, not opinion. They estimate viewing activity and not the opinions about programs. In addition to ratings, there are other measures of tuning and viewing activity of interest. One is households using television, or HUT for short. It is the percent of all households with one or more sets in use during a period of time. As you would expect, household tuning levels vary by time of day and by time of year. And here you can see that depending on the season, for example, the solid bars are February of '79. The viewing is higher than it is in July, with the exception of perhaps very late in the evening. And you can see that it varies considerably by the time of the day. In the early morning and in the daytime, it ranges anywhere from about 17% to 30%. As you move in toward prime time or the network programming time in the evening, the viewing activity increases to the point where in February, where the daylight hours are shorter and where the weather is such that people cannot spend much time outdoors, we find that almost 2 out of every 3 households have a television set tuned during the average minute between 8 and 11 o'clock. That's 8 and 11 o'clock Eastern time, and that would correspond to 7 to 10 o'clock in Central time. And then as you can see, after that time, the viewing starts to decline. Interestingly enough, in July, the viewing activity late in the evening is about at the same level as it is in February. That's probably due to the difference in daylight hours, plus the fact that since viewing is less than in prime time in July, perhaps people make up that viewing by viewing later in the evening. Another measure of viewing activity is share of audience, which is the percent of households with a set on that is tuned to a specific program or station. That's simply the rating divided by the number or percentage of households that are viewing. The share is a relatively stable figure and is not as highly subject to seasonal and time period variations which affect ratings. And for that reason, it is often used as a measure of program trends. If a program share is declining, that is an indication that it may be losing its popularity. Conversely, if it's increasing, it may be an indication that it is increasing in popularity. The Nielsen Company provides 2 types of audience estimate services. One is called the Nielsen Television Index, which provides audience estimates for national television programs, and is probably the one that you've read about. The second is the Nielsen Station Index, which provides audience estimates for stations and programs in over 200 local television markets. This is the service that you may not be familiar with. And each of these services differs in the methods used to derive the audience estimates. Data collection is one of the most critical elements in producing reliable audience estimates. Some of the major considerations in data collection are accuracy, timeliness, and cost. There are several methods used for obtaining viewing information, each of which fulfills these objectives in varying degrees. The method used to collect household tuning information for national programs is an automatic system of recording set tuning. Each sample household is equipped with a meter, and here is a picture of it, is equipped with a meter that measures minute-by-minute tuning of all sets in a household. The meter is connected to each set in a household and stores in an electronic memory the time each set is turned on and off, the length of time tuned to each channel, and all channel changes. Here's another picture of it. The meter itself is here on the right, and the device to the next is a battery pack. In the event that there's a power outage in the home, we want to keep this going because it does have a clock in it to record time. The meter in each household is connected to a full-time leased telephone line. These phone lines are also connected to a computer located in Nielsen Central Data Collection and Processing Facilities. At least once each day, the computer automatically dials up each home and retrieves the stored tuning information. Thus, for each sample household, we have a day-by-day record of tuning by time of day and channel. Now, the home unit function, it determines sets on and off and tuning, all television sets in the home. Records the data automatically by crystal clock time, stores the information in circuits 1-minute resolution. That means it's interrogating each set every minute, and provides for readouts over telephone lines. Here's a schematic diagram of the data collection system. The household is equipped with a meter which is recording the set tuning of every set in the home. It's connected by a phone line to a data collection computer located in a central data collection facility. And part of that operation is an automatic dialer which dials up the homes automatically at least once a day and more often depending on the amount of tuning activity. Extracts the information, processes, passes that information onto a computer that produces the reports. Now, the information is also obtained from the networks as to the time each network program is telecast by their affiliated stations. This is the station program information. This information, along with the tuning information obtained from the sample households, is used to produce ratings for each network program. The ratings are then made available on a daily basis via terminals and client offices, which of course are connected by telephone lines. In addition, there are some certain supplementary reports which are printed and produced on a slower basis, and these are of secondary importance. Thus, with this system, today's ratings, that is Tuesday's ratings, will be available to our clients on Thursday morning. In addition to the daily ratings, as I've mentioned, a variety of other audience estimates are provided in printed reports. As you can see here, a speedy, fast, timely delivery is of the essence. Since tuning information is obtained by minute, the program rating is really the average of the ratings for each minute, or in other words, the average minute audience to the program. Here, for example, we might find that the number of households tuned to a program varies through the duration of the show. This happens to be a 30-minute duration telecast, and the rating then would be simply the average of the percent of households tuned each minute to the program. The use of a meter has advantages compared to other data collection methods, most of which require varying degrees of participation by the household members. The use of a meter requires no effort by the household, which results in achieving a higher rate of cooperation compared to other methods. The use of a meter also results in very prompt delivery of household ratings. Delivery is almost virtually instantaneous. This quick delivery can result in substantial programming cost savings, since it can reduce the number of episodes of a program series that need to be produced prior to the beginning of the telecast of a series of programs. Since the meter requires no effort on the part of the household members, tuning data can be collected day by day for long periods of time. This continuous collection of data enables advertisers to evaluate the audience to a schedule of commercial announcements during a specific period of time. For example, if a commercial announcement was scheduled 6 times, the percent of households viewing only once might be 6.5%. Those viewing twice, 9.6%, and so on. The cumulative percent for the sum of all 6 announcements is the number of households reached by at least one commercial announcement. In this case, for example, 43.4% of households saw at least one telecast of the commercial. This information about the cumulative audience and frequency of viewing can be very useful to an advertiser. And this is really only possible to do this, provide this kind of information with an automatic means of collecting viewing data. While the meter can record set tuning information, it cannot provide information about who in the household is watching. This information is obtained by a diary among a national sample of households, and the diary is simply a record of the viewing for a week. A diary is provided for each set. Entries are made by quarter hour, showing whether the set is on or off, the station, channel, the program viewed, and the person's viewing. At the end of the week, the diaries are returned by mail. The viewing data from the diary sample is combined with household tuning data from the meter sample to estimate the number and types of viewers to national TV programs. Here is an illustration of the diary, and you can see it's a relatively simple document to use. You just indicate which quarter hours the set was on, the call letters and channel and the program name, and then who in the household was viewing that program. How are the national samples selected? There are 2 national samples. One is used for meters and the second is used for diaries. Both are samples of housing units which may be vacant or occupied. If occupied, the household is asked to participate in the sample. If vacant, the housing unit is periodically checked to determine if it has been occupied. I'm sorry this slide didn't turn out too well, but this is supposedly a description of, or a picture of some of the sample counties. Although the uses of these samples are somewhat different, they are selected using the same process. In sampling terminology, the method used is a multi-stage area probability sample. Since an up-to-date, complete list of housing units in the U.S. does not exist, a sample of small land areas was selected and a list of housing units was compiled in each area. The sample housing units were then selected from the lists for each area. The areas are selected in stages, with decreasingly smaller areas selected at each stage. The sample is a probability sample since the areas and housing units are selected with a known non-zero probability. The sample was designed to give each housing unit an equal chance of selection. The national samples were selected in 1972 using housing unit counts for the 1970 census to determine the probability of selecting the various areas. The first stage consisted of the selection of counties. Large metropolitan counties were included in the sample with certainty, and a sample of counties was selected from among the remaining less populated counties. The national meter sample is located in about 500 counties, resulting in a well-dispersed sample distributed in proportion to the population of the U.S. And in case you're wondering, 12 of the sample counties are located in Iowa. The next step was the selection of a group of blocks within the selected counties. For areas without street blocks, areas designated by the Census Bureau for enumeration by census takers were selected. The terms BG and ED are short for block group and enumeration district. Again, information from the 1970 census about the number of housing units in the block groups and enumeration districts was used to determine the probability of selecting the areas. Within the selected block groups or enumeration areas, the next step was to select individual blocks or combinations of blocks. In census enumeration areas, small areas with clearly identified boundaries were selected. For example, here is a census map showing the portion of the blocks in the Atlanta metropolitan area and the selected sample blocks. Looking in more detail, we see the sampling area consisted of 3 blocks. A Nielsen employee would go to this area and list all of the housing units in these blocks. Each structure is listed by address, and the location of the housing unit in the structure is also listed. Now in the rural areas, here is a census map showing the boundaries of a census enumeration district, or ED for short. The boundaries are usually roads or a political jurisdiction boundary. The sample enumeration district is subdivided into smaller areas with easily identifiable boundaries. Depending on the number of housing units in each area, 1 or more are selected for the sample. Housing units in the selected area are then listed. Since such housing units in such areas generally do not have addresses, the housing units are mapped and each is described by its physical characteristics. And this is an expensive operation, believe me. It probably takes an enumerator or a surveyor at least 1 to 2 days to do this work in the rural areas. The sample of housing units was then selected from the list of housing units compiled for each area. The sample was designed to select 1 housing unit per area for the meter sample and 2 housing units per area for the diary sample. However, if the number of housing units in the sample varies from the census count, then fewer or more housing units may be selected in order to give each housing unit the same chance to be selected. The actual number of housing units selected depends on the difference between the census count and the count attained at the time the housing units are listed. The selection of areas and housing units is done by a specified random process. The Nielsen representative that contacts the selected household to obtain their participation has no control or influence over the selection of the sample household. All selected households, regardless of their characteristics or the amount of viewing they do, are eligible to be included in the sample. Other than having a television set, there are no restrictions regarding the households selected for the sample. The only exception is to exclude households that have a direct financial interest in the ratings, such as key employees of network stations, advertising agencies, or advertisers. And there are about 4 or 5 such homes where we have landed on such persons. All housing units in the meter sample remain in the sample for 5 years. Those in the diary sample remain in the sample for 3 years. Every 3 months, 5% of the meter households and 1/12 of the diary households are rotated out of the sample. If households move, the new occupants are recruited for the sample. So during a year, about 1/3 of the meter sample is replaced by another household, either due to the planned rotation or due to the households moving. Compared to other national samples of households of about the same size, Nielsen samples are located in considerably more areas and counties. Most national samples by design consist of more than 1 household per area, and in some samples substantially more than 1 household. This is done to reduce field travel costs. Sample and field costs, primarily travel costs, are relatively high for the Nielsen samples because of their geographic dispersion. However, statistical theory tells us that the precision of a sample of a given size can be increased by dispersing it over as many and as large of areas as possible. Although this results in increased sampling and field costs, these costs are a relatively low share of the total costs. These costs are essentially fixed costs and are small when computed on a per rating basis. Considering the amount of information that Nielsen supplies on programs, the sampling and the field costs are relatively low. Because of the relationship of sampling cost to total costs and the ability to spread these costs over many years, the sample can be highly dispersed. All housing units in existence at the time the sample was selected had a chance to be included. But what of housing units coming into existence after the sample has been selected? In areas where building permits are required for new construction, which is true in about 85% of the U.S., information is obtained about the number of residential construction permits issued in each of about 14,000 building permit jurisdictions. A sample of building permit issuing places is then selected, and a sample of new housing units is selected from the permits issued by the selected permit issuing places. In order to keep the size of the sample constant, the sample of new units then replace existing sample units in the proper proportion. For example, if the housing inventory in the U.S. is increased by 1% during a year, then about 1% of the sample will then consist of such new units. In areas not requiring building permits, the sample areas are periodically relisted to identify new units. Since the sample was selected using known probabilities of selection, it is possible to relate the viewing activity of the sample households to all households in the U.S. Now, viewing activity obtained from a sample will differ somewhat from a measurement of all households using the same methods to collect and process tuning information. Using the laws of probability, it is possible to estimate the degree to which a sample result may differ from a complete measurement. The daily national Nielsen household ratings are derived from a sample of about 1,100 meter-equipped households. Assume for the moment that it is possible to obtain tuning information for all households in the U.S. using the same methods used for the sample, that is, the same meters, the same skill level for installations, and so on. Also assume we found 20% of households tuned to a specific telecast of a program. Further assume it would be possible to select a large number of samples of the same size, say 1,000 samples of about 1,100 households each, and that the same sampling, data collection, tabulating, and other related procedures would be used for each sample. A tabulation of these 1,000 households would show that about 50% of them would be within 0.8 of a percentage point of the rating obtained from a complete measurement. About 75% would be within 1.4 points, and almost all of them would be within 3.1 points of the complete measurement ratings. Thus, the chances are about the same that a sample-derived rating will be within 0.8 of a rating point of a complete measurement than it will differ by more than 0.8 of a point. A single sample, of course, may produce results that are very close or considerably different from a complete measurement. But it is possible to estimate the chances that a sample estimate will be within some specified interval of a complete measurement. It's about an even money bet that a sample-derived rating will be within 0.8 of a point of a complete measurement rating of 20, and the odds are about 3 to 1 that the sample rating will be within 1.4 points. Depending on the uses made of these ratings, these sample-derived estimates may or may not be sufficiently precise. It should be noted, however, that advertising or programming decisions are generally not made on single telecasts of a program, but on an average of 2 or more programs. As information becomes available about the level of viewing to additional telecasts of a program, sampling variation is reduced. If we examine the distribution of sample and complete measurements for the average of 4 telecasts, and making certain assumptions about the duplication of tuning to more than one telecast, we might find these differences. Here we see that as we gain information about viewing to a program, the degree of uncertainty about the performance of a program is reduced. Many advertisers advertise on a number of different programs and are primarily interested in the average audience to these programs, or in other words, the average audience to their commercials. The sampling variation associated with the average viewing to 2 or more programs is less than that to any single program. In addition to measuring viewing to national television programs, estimates are also made for audiences to individual stations. Currently, there are over 700 private commercial stations and over 250 public stations in the U.S. in each of these stations is assigned to one of about 200 television markets, such as these television markets that serve Iowa. Virtually every home in Iowa is viewing stations from one or more of these markets. And you'll notice, or stations in these areas, and you'll notice that some of the homes in Iowa are viewing stations that are located outside the state, such as those in Omaha and Rock Island and Moline. Each market is surveyed at least 4 times a year, in November, February, May, and July. Some larger markets may be surveyed 5, 6, or 7 times per year. The survey period is usually 4 weeks, which means that each market is surveyed at least 16 weeks of each year. In the 4 largest markets, both meters and diaries are used to obtain tuning and viewing information. The meter operations are the same as described for the national sample, with the exception of sample size. In New York and Los Angeles, the sample size is about 475 households, and in Chicago and San Francisco, it is about 275. The sample in Chicago is in the process of being increased to 475. In all other markets, diaries are used to collect viewing data. And again, here we see the diary. It's really nothing more than a device to record viewing activity. The diary used for local market surveys is essentially the same as used for national surveys. A diary is provided for each set in the home, and respondents are asked to record set usage by quarter hour for a 1-week period. And if the set is on, entries are made concerning channel number, call letters, program, and identification of persons watching the program. The sample design and selection procedure for diary samples used for local market surveys is considerably different than used for the national sample. For cost reasons, sample recruitment is done by telephone rather than personally, and excludes non-telephone households. About 7 to 8% of U.S. households do not have a phone, and this varies somewhat by region of the country. For example, in Iowa, almost every household has a telephone, so exclusion of non-telephone households is not a serious bias in Iowa. 2 methods are currently used to select samples of telephone households.
Beyond that, and to explore philosophically.
File of listings of all U.S. telephone directories. The file contains about 56 million names, addresses, and telephone numbers. For selecting samples in markets limited to listed numbers, the telephone listings are sequenced geographically by zip code within a county, and the sample is systematically selected from the listings. By sequencing the file geographically, the sample is dispersed in proportion to listed telephone households. In the larger markets, samples are selected from unlisted as well as listed numbers. As I've already mentioned, there are 2 types of unlisted numbers: the voluntary unlisted, those who choose not to be in the directory, and the involuntary unlisted, those with telephones placed in service since the latest directory was compiled. Using the Metromail file of listings and other sources, telephone exchanges serving a television market can be identified. Now, it would be possible to select a sample of all telephone households by selecting a sample of exchanges and completing the telephone number with 4 random digits. A sample selected in this way would include listed, unlisted, non-residential numbers, and numbers not in service. However, since about 80% of all possible numbers are not in service, this procedure would require considerable dialings and consequently high costs to identify the numbers assigned to households. Identifying not in service numbers in advance of selecting the sample will reduce costs. In each exchange, there are anywhere from 1 to 10,000 possible numbers that may be assigned to residences. These 10,000 numbers can be arranged in consecutive blocks of 100 numbers each. And using the Metromail file of telephone listings, the number of listings in each block can be determined. Any block with, let's say, no listings is can be classified as not in service, and all numbers in such blocks except any listed numbers are eliminated from the sampling frame. The choice of the number of listings to use as a threshold for identifying not in service is arbitrary. One could use 0, 1, or 2, that is, exclude only blocks without listings, but many of the listings in blocks with 1, 2, or 3 listings are made at the time listings are transferred from the directory to a computer file. Therefore, we eliminate all blocks that have 2 or fewer listings. This process does eliminate a small number of residents, resulting in a slight bias in the sampling frame. The next step in the process is to divide the remaining numbers into 2 lists. Here's an illustration, for example, of the listings. If we had 26 listings, for example, in the block of numbers from 5200 to 5299, we would assume that that block is in service by the telephone company. Another block may not have any listings, and we would make the assumption then that those numbers in that block are not being used by the phone company. The next step in the process is to divide the remaining numbers into 2 lists, those listed in the file, and by elimination, those not listed by Metromail. Samples of telephone numbers are systematically selected at the same rate from both lists. One can see that what we're doing is dividing 10,000 phone numbers into an exchange into those that we estimate are not in service and those that are in service. And among those in service, we can identify those who have listings in a telephone directory and the numbers that are not listed. An alternative procedure would be to select a sample of the in-service numbers, in other words, among the 3,600, without identifying the listed and unlisted numbers. However, identifying listed numbers has some advantages. For households not contacted, despite numerous dialings, diaries still can be mailed to those listed since a name and address is available. For listed households, names and addresses need not be obtained on the sample recruitment call, reducing the interview time and the costs. Telephone calls are made to sample households to verify or obtain names and addresses, determine the number of television sets in the household, and obtain certain other information required for mailing diaries. Diaries are mailed to households for which names and addresses are available and are returned by mail by the sample households. Sample sizes vary by market size and range from 180 in the smallest markets to over 1,700 in the largest markets. During the year, over 800,000 U.S. households are mailed diaries, of which about 443,000 or 55% return diaries that can be used to tabulate viewing. As you can see, this is an operation of substantial volume. In the Des Moines market, about 3,900 households were sent diaries, of which 63% returned usable diaries. Closer to home in Story County, 258 households were sent diaries in the past year, and 71% returned usable diaries. The rest of the U.S. should be like Story County when it comes to cooperation. During the November, February, and May survey periods, when all 200 markets are surveyed, diaries from about 100,000 households are processed, and the reports for the 200 markets are mailed within 23 days after the survey period. Just as in our national service, timeliness of survey results is an important objective and very important to our clients. Martin Mayer once said that an ideal rating service could be conducted by a staff of well-trained, reasonably intelligent, highly responsible ghosts. They would drift unseen through the sample homes and observe and record television viewing. The beauty of this system would be that it would virtually eliminate bias. Bias is one source of total survey error. The other is variable error. Variable errors are considered to be random with zero mean. One source already described is sampling variability, resulting from including only part of the population in the sample. Other variable errors are related to field and processing errors, which are generally small in both our meter and diary operations. Non-variable sampling errors, however, may introduce consistent biases in the estimates. That is, viewing may be understated or overstated regardless of sample size. The magnitude of biases may vary from program to program. Sampling bias may result from using inappropriate selection methods used to select a sample. For example, if equal selection probabilities are used to select a sample from a list, but some units appear more than once, they would have twice the chance of selection. this can occur with telephone samples. Usually the most serious biases are those related to non-sampling errors. Processing errors, such as incorrect estimates of the number of households or persons used to project ratings to totals, may result in a consistent over or underestimate. Non-coverage is another source of bias and is the term which means the exclusion of some units in the population from the sampling frame, such as non-phone households, which we cannot include in our local television surveys because of costs. And it's also true of unlisted households in areas where samples are restricted to listed telephone households. Non-response refers to those refusing to cooperate, those incapable of recording, or those homes that are never contacted. Non-response bias is probably one of the most serious sources of biases, not only in television surveys, but in any kind of a survey, and is a real challenge to survey practitioners. Response error is the reporting or recording of incorrect viewing activity. Response error would also include possible changes of activity due to being included in the survey. This is always of concern to survey researchers. In diary surveys, non-response and response error are most likely to be the major contributors to bias. One advantage of a meter is that response error is reduced considerably, if not eliminated entirely. Non-response error is also reduced since no effort is required by the household, and a higher percent of households are therefore willing to cooperate and participate in the sample. Now, considering these potential errors, you may wonder about the accuracy of ratings. Various expensive methodological studies have attempted to dimension these biases. One method that has been used as a standard is the telephone coincidental method. This procedure consists of obtaining viewing information at the time of a telephone call. Because the interview is short, cooperation is relatively high, between 85 and 90%. Response error is also considered to be minimized since relatively little information is obtained from the household. What we do is contact the home, ask if a set was on, one or more sets were on, if so, what channel they were tuned to. And we think that information is very reliable. However, it should be noted that this method is still not error-free. You still have certain biases like interviewer effects. Sometimes the interviewer themselves can direct people to giving certain kinds of answers. Viewing levels from telephone coincidentals were in close agreement with national household television usage levels derived from the meter sample, and also the person's television usage levels derived from the diary sample. Results from telephone coincidentals were also compared to local market diary service in a couple of markets using listed telephone households as a sampling frame. These comparisons show that listed households viewed 1 to 3% less than all telephone households. That response bias resulted in a 4 to 8% understatement of viewing, and that non-response resulted in a 1 to 3% overstatement of usage. These results are similar to other tests that show that diary surveys understate television usage. Now, ratings are a set of statistical estimates and are reported periodically just as many other statistics are reported periodically. And just as many statistical reports may contain unpleasant findings, ratings may also be unpleasant and discomforting. These unpleasant ratings usually result in reappraisals of performance, which in turn lead to recommendations for corrective action. Thank you very much.